Emotional neglect within families is one of the most silent yet deeply damaging experiences a person can go through, because it doesn't always leave visible scars, but it reshapes the way someone understands love, belonging, and self-worth. Unlike obvious conflict or abuse, emotional neglect often hides behind normal routines, polite conversations, and the illusion of a functioning family, making it harder to recognize and even harder to explain. It happens when a child's emotional needs, such as attention, validation, affection, or understanding, are consistently ignored, dismissed, or minimized. Over time, this absence of emotional connection teaches the individual that their feelings do not matter, that expressing themselves is pointless, or worse, that they are a burden for even having needs. Growing up in such an environment can lead to a quiet internal struggle, where the person constantly questions their value. They may become overly independent, not because they want to be, but because they have learned that relying on others leads to disappointment. They might suppress their emotions, avoid vulnerability, or struggle to form deep connections, carrying an invisible weight into adulthood. This emotional gap doesn't disappear with time. Instead, it evolves, showing up in relationships, self-doubt, and an ongoing search for validation from people who may never provide it. What makes emotional neglect particularly painful is that it often comes from those who are expected to offer unconditional support. When parents fail to acknowledge a child's emotional world, the child may internalize the belief that love must be earned through achievements, silence, or compliance. They may become high achievers, people pleasers, or emotionally distant individuals, all in an attempt to cope with that early void. Even in moments of success, there can be a lingering emptiness, as the recognition they truly seek was never about external accomplishments but about being seen and understood. This kind of neglect also distorts the way a person perceives relationships. They may tolerate disrespect, struggle to set boundaries, or feel uncomfortable when someone genuinely cares for them, because it contradicts what they have always known. Trust becomes fragile, and the fear of rejection lingers beneath the surface, influencing decisions and reactions in subtle but powerful ways. The long-term impact is not just emotional but psychological, shaping identity, confidence, and the ability to experience closeness. It creates a cycle where the individual must unlearn years of conditioning, gradually realizing that their feelings are valid, their presence matters, and their worth was never dependent on whether someone chose to acknowledge them or not. The pain of exclusion during important family events carries a unique emotional weight, because those moments are meant to symbolize unity, belonging, and shared love. Celebrations like anniversaries, birthdays, or gatherings are not just social occasions. They represent acknowledgement, connection, and the reassurance that one has a place within the family. Being excluded from such moments creates a deep sense of rejection that goes far beyond missing an event. It feels like being erased from a space where one naturally expects to belong. When someone realizes they were deliberately not invited, the hurt often arrives in layers. At first, there is confusion, a quiet attempt to rationalize the situation. Perhaps it was an oversight, a misunderstanding, or a simple mistake. But when the truth becomes clear, that confusion turns into a sharp awareness of intentional exclusion. That realization can be devastating, because it implies not just distance, but a conscious decision to leave someone out. It forces a person to confront uncomfortable questions about their place in the family and whether their presence was ever truly valued. This kind of exclusion also magnifies feelings of isolation. While others gather, laugh, and create memories, the excluded individual is left on the outside, often imagining the scene they are not part of. The absence becomes louder than any presence, and the silence from loved ones can feel heavier than direct words. It creates a contrast between expectation and reality. The expectation of inclusion, warmth, and recognition, against the reality of being overlooked or dismissed. Emotionally, such experiences can lead to self-doubt and internal questioning. A person may begin to wonder what they did wrong, replay past interactions, and search for reasons to justify the exclusion. Even when the fault does not lie with them, the mind often turns inward, trying to make sense of the rejection. This can slowly chip away at confidence and reinforce feelings of unworthiness, especially when it happens repeatedly. Over time, the pain of being excluded during meaningful occasions can reshape how a person approaches relationships and celebrations. They may start distancing themselves, lowering expectations, or avoiding situations where they might feel unwanted again. What was once a source of joy becomes associated with anxiety or emotional risk. The impact is not just about a single event but about what that event represents. The denial of belonging in a space that should have felt like home. The silent struggles of feeling unwanted by one's own parents create a deeply internalized conflict that often goes unnoticed by the outside world because it is rarely expressed openly. It is not always about harsh words or visible rejection. More often, it is about subtle patterns, lack of attention, absence of encouragement, emotional distance, that quietly communicate a painful message over time. When a child senses that their presence does not bring warmth or joy, they begin to question their place in the very foundation of their life. This feeling does not appear all at once. It develops gradually through repeated moments where emotional needs are unmet. A child may look for approval, affection, or even simple acknowledgement, only to be met with indifference or dismissal. These small experiences accumulate, forming a belief that they are not truly wanted, even if their basic needs are provided. Of emotional connection becomes louder than any words, shaping how they interpret love and relationships. As this belief takes root, it often leads to an internal struggle between longing and self-protection. On one hand, there is a natural desire to be accepted and loved by parents, to feel seen and valued. On the other hand, repeated disappointment creates a need to guard against further hurt. This tension can result in behaviors such as withdrawing emotionally, becoming overly independent, or constantly trying to prove worth through achievements or obedience. The child learns to adapt, not by addressing the pain, but by reshaping themselves in ways they hope will finally earn acceptance. This silent struggle continues into later stages of life, often without being fully recognized. The individual may carry an underlying sense of not being enough, even in environments where they are appreciated. Compliments can feel unfamiliar or undeserved, while criticism may feel amplified. There is often a tendency to overanalyze interactions, searching for signs of rejection or disapproval, because that pattern has become deeply ingrained. The difficulty lies in the fact that these feelings are rarely validated. Society often assumes that parental love is constant and unconditional, making it harder for someone to articulate or even admit that they feel unwanted. This can lead to isolation, as the individual may believe their experience is unique or misunderstood. The struggle remains internal, shaping thoughts, emotions, and decisions in subtle but powerful ways, influencing how they see themselves and how they relate to others throughout their life. The power of self-respect over seeking validation becomes most evident when a person realizes that constantly chasing approval from others often leads to disappointment and emotional exhaustion. Validation, especially from those who withhold it, can feel like something that must be earned through effort, sacrifice, or conformity. This creates a cycle where a person keeps adjusting themselves, hoping that one day they will be seen, appreciated, or accepted. Over time, this pursuit can erode one's sense of identity, as decisions begin to revolve around pleasing others rather than honoring personal values and feelings. Self-respect, on the other hand, shifts that focus inward. It is the quiet understanding that one's worth is not dependent on external acknowledgement. When self-respect takes root, it changes how a person responds to rejection or indifference. Instead of questioning their value, they begin to question the situation, recognizing that not all environments or relationships are capable of offering the respect they deserve. This realization is not about arrogance or detachment, but about clarity. It allows a person to stop overextending themselves in spaces where their efforts go unnoticed or unappreciated. Choosing self-respect often requires difficult emotional adjustments. It may involve setting boundaries, stepping back from certain relationships, or accepting that some people may never provide the validation once hoped for. These choices can feel uncomfortable at first, especially for someone who has spent years seeking approval. There can be moments of doubt where old patterns resurface, urging them to try harder or give more. However, with time, self-respect creates a sense of stability that external validation never could. This shift also transforms how a person carries themselves. Their actions become more intentional, guided by self-awareness rather than fear of rejection. They no longer feel the need to explain their worth or justify their presence. Instead, they move with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing they are enough as they are. Relationships also begin to change, as they attract connections that are based on mutual respect rather than one-sided effort. The strength of self-respect lies in its independence. It does not fluctuate based on someone else's opinion or behavior. It remains steady, even in situations where recognition is absent. This inner foundation allows a person to walk away from what diminishes them and to stand firm in what aligns with their values, creating a life that is not defined by the approval of others, but by a deep and unwavering sense of personal worth. Turning hurt into strength instead of bitterness is a deeply transformative process that requires awareness, patience, and intentional effort. When someone experiences emotional pain, especially from those they trusted, the initial reaction is often a mix of anger, sadness, and confusion. These emotions are natural, but if left unchecked, they can harden into bitterness, a lingering resentment that affects not only how a person sees others but also how they see themselves. Bitterness can become a quiet burden, influencing thoughts, reactions, and relationships in ways that limit growth and emotional freedom. Choosing strength over bitterness does not mean ignoring the pain or pretending it never existed. It begins with acknowledging the hurt fully, allowing those emotions to be felt without judgment. This step is important because suppressed feelings often resurface in unhealthy ways. By facing the pain directly, a person gains a clearer understanding of what they went through and how it affected them. This awareness creates an opportunity to respond consciously rather than react impulsively. Strength emerges when a person decides not to let their negative experiences define their identity or future. Instead of dwelling on what was lost or unfair, they begin to focus on what can be learned and how they can grow from it. This shift in perspective allows pain to become a source of insight rather than a permanent wound. It encourages resilience, teaching the individual that they can endure difficult emotions and still move forward with purpose. Another important aspect of this transformation is the ability to let go of the need for revenge or validation from those who caused the hurt. Holding on to anger often ties a person emotionally to the past, keeping them stuck in a cycle of reliving the same experience. Strength, in contrast, involves releasing that attachment and reclaiming control over one's own emotional state. It is about recognizing that personal growth does not depend on others acknowledging their actions. As this mindset develops, it begins to influence behavior and outlook. The individual becomes more self-aware, more grounded, and less reactive to negativity. They start to build a sense of inner stability that is not easily shaken by external circumstances. Relationships may also improve, as they approach others with clearer boundaries and a healthier sense of self. Over time, what once felt like a source of pain becomes a foundation for personal strength, shaping a more resilient and self-assured individual, who is no longer defined by past hurt, but by the way they chose to rise above it. The significance of dignity in the face of rejection lies in the ability to maintain composure, self-worth, and inner stability, even when confronted with situations that challenge one's sense of belonging. Rejection, especially from those who are expected to offer acceptance, can provoke strong emotional reactions such as anger, humiliation, or the urge to seek immediate validation. In such moments, dignity becomes a powerful anchor, guiding a person to respond with restraint rather than impulse, and with self-respect rather than desperation. Dignity does not mean suppressing emotions or pretending that rejection does not hurt. Instead, it involves acknowledging the pain while choosing not to let it dictate behavior. This distinction is important because reactions driven purely by emotion can often lead to actions that a person later regrets, such as confrontation fueled by anger or attempts to prove worth to those who have already dismissed it. Acting with dignity creates a pause between feeling and response, allowing for thoughtful choices that align with personal values rather than momentary impulses. Maintaining dignity also protects a person's sense of identity. When someone is rejected, there is often a temptation to internalize that experience as a reflection of their worth. However, dignity reinforces the understanding that rejection is not always a measure of value, but often a reflection of the other party's limitations, perceptions, or circumstances. This perspective helps prevent the erosion of self-esteem and allows a person to stand firm in their sense of self, regardless of external treatment. Another aspect of dignity is how it shapes the way others perceive and respond to a situation. A composed and self-assured response can shift the dynamic, as it removes the expected reaction of vulnerability or desperation. It creates a sense of quiet strength that is difficult to overlook, often leaving a deeper impression than any emotional outburst could. This does not mean the intention is to influence others, but rather that dignity naturally commands a different kind of respect. Choosing dignity can also redefine personal boundaries. It often leads to a clearer understanding of what is acceptable and what is not, encouraging a person to distance themselves from environments or relationships that consistently undermine their worth. This decision is not driven by pride, but by self-awareness, and the recognition that staying in such situations can be more damaging than stepping away. Over time, consistently responding with dignity builds a strong internal foundation. It fosters resilience, emotional control, and a sense of quiet confidence that is not easily shaken by rejection or criticism. This inner steadiness allows a person to navigate difficult experiences without losing their sense of self, reinforcing the idea that while rejection may be unavoidable, how one chooses to respond to it ultimately defines their strength and character. Unspoken revenge through success and composure is a concept rooted in the idea that the most powerful response to mistreatment is not confrontation, but transformation. When someone has been overlooked, underestimated, or hurt, there is often an expectation that they will react emotionally, seeking explanations, expressing anger, or trying to prove their worth through words. Unspoken revenge challenges that expectation by shifting the focus away from others and onto personal growth, allowing actions to speak far louder than any reaction ever could. This form of response begins with a decision to redirect energy. Instead of dwelling on the injustice or replaying painful moments, the individual channels that emotional intensity into self-improvement. This could involve building skills, pursuing goals, strengthening emotional resilience, or creating a life that reflects independence and self-sufficiency. The process is not about showing others what they missed out on, but about becoming someone who no longer depends on their recognition. Composure plays a crucial role in this transformation. Remaining calm and collected, especially in situations where one might have previously reacted with frustration or hurt, sends a powerful message. It demonstrates control, maturity, and a deep sense of self-awareness. Composure removes the satisfaction that others might expect from provoking a reaction, and instead replaces it with quiet confidence. This shift can be disarming, as it contradicts assumptions and forces others to reassess their perceptions. Success, in this context, is not limited to material achievements or public recognition. It includes emotional stability, clarity of purpose, and the ability to move forward without being weighed down by past experiences. At a point where their happiness and progress are no longer tied to those who once dismissed them, it becomes a form of silent victory. The absence of resentment and the presence of growth create a contrast that is often more impactful than direct confrontation. What makes this approach particularly powerful is that it does not rely on others to acknowledge it. There is no need for validation, apology, or recognition. The change is internal first, and its effects naturally become visible over time. Those who once underestimated or ignored the individual may eventually notice the transformation, but by that point, their opinion holds far less significance. This kind of unspoken response reshapes the narrative. It turns a story of hurt into one of strength, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let it dictate the future. It reflects a level of discipline and self-respect that prioritizes long-term growth over short-term reactions, creating a lasting impact that words alone could never achieve. The contrast between expectation and harsh reality becomes most painful when it unfolds in spaces where one anticipates comfort, acceptance, and emotional safety. Expectations are often built over time, shaped by memories, cultural values, and the natural belief that certain relationships, especially within a family, carry an unspoken promise of inclusion and care. These expectations are not always consciously formed. They develop quietly, reinforced by traditions, shared moments, and the idea that some bonds are meant to be reliable. When reality sharply contradicts those expectations, the emotional impact is immediate and disorienting. This contrast creates a sense of internal conflict. On one side, there is the version of reality a person believed in, the warmth, the belonging, the assumption of being valued. On the other side is the actual experience, which may involve exclusion, indifference, or rejection. The gap between these two can feel overwhelming, because it forces a sudden reassessment of what was once taken for granted. It is not just about what is happening in the present moment, but about what it implies regarding the past and the future of those relationships. One of the most challenging aspects of this contrast is the way it disrupts emotional certainty. Expectations provide a sense of stability. They allow a person to predict how situations might unfold and how they will be treated. When those expectations are broken, it introduces doubt and insecurity. A person may begin to question their understanding of the relationship, wondering whether they misinterpreted earlier signs or placed too much faith in something that was never as strong as they believed. This questioning can lead to a deeper sense of vulnerability, as the foundation they relied on no longer feels solid. The harshness of reality is often intensified by its timing. When the truth surfaces during significant or meaningful moments, the emotional impact becomes even stronger. These occasions carry symbolic importance, and any deviation from expectation feels magnified. What might have been a manageable disappointment in an ordinary situation becomes a defining moment when it occurs during an event tied to connection and recognition. Over time, this contrast can reshape how a person forms expectations in the future. They may become more cautious, less willing to assume positive outcomes, or more guarded in their emotional investments. While this can serve as a protective mechanism, it can also limit openness and trust. The experience leaves a lasting impression, not only because of what happened, but because of the realization that expectations, no matter how deeply rooted, do not always align with reality. The emotional weight carried into adulthood from early family experiences often develops quietly, shaping a person's inner world long before they fully understand its influence. Childhood is where foundational beliefs about love, worth, and belonging are formed, and when those experiences are marked by neglect, exclusion, or emotional distance, the effects rarely remain confined to the past. Instead, they are carried forward, influencing thoughts, behaviors, and relationships in ways that may not always be immediately visible but are deeply felt. As a person grows older, these unresolved emotions can manifest in subtle yet powerful patterns. There may be an ongoing sense of needing to prove oneself, a drive to seek validation from others, or a tendency to overanalyze interactions in search of acceptance or rejection. Even in situations where there is no immediate threat, the emotional memory of past experiences can create a heightened sensitivity, causing reactions that feel disproportionate but are rooted in earlier pain. This can lead to internal conflicts, where a person logically understands their present circumstances, yet emotionally responds based on past conditioning. The weight of these experiences can also influence the way relationships are approached. Trust may become difficult to establish, as the fear of being overlooked or dismissed lingers beneath the surface. Some individuals may become overly accommodating, prioritizing others' needs in an attempt to secure connection, while others may do the opposite, maintaining emotional distance to avoid vulnerability. Both responses stem from the same source: a learned expectation that emotional safety is uncertain. Self-perception is another area significantly affected by this carried weight. Early experiences can shape how a person views their own value, often leading to persistent self-doubt or a feeling of not being enough. Achievements and external successes may provide temporary reassurance, but they do not always address the deeper need for internal validation. This creates a cycle where a person continues to strive for recognition while struggling to fully believe in their own worth. Despite its heaviness, this emotional weight is not fixed or unchangeable. Awareness plays a crucial role in recognizing these patterns and understanding their origins. By identifying how past experiences influence present behavior, a person gains the ability to gradually reshape their responses and beliefs. This process requires patience and self-reflection, as it involves unlearning deeply ingrained patterns and replacing them with healthier perspectives. The impact of carrying these emotions into adulthood lies not only in the challenges it creates, but also in the opportunity it presents for growth. It highlights the resilience required to navigate such experiences, and the potential to build a stronger, more self-aware sense of identity that is no longer solely defined by the past but informed by it. Redemption through self-worth, not confrontation, reflects a powerful shift from seeking justice externally to rebuilding strength internally. When someone has been hurt, rejected, or undervalued, the natural instinct is often to confront those responsible, to demand explanations, apologies, or acknowledgement. While confrontation can sometimes provide temporary relief, it does not always lead to true closure, especially when the other party is unwilling or unable to understand the depth of the pain they caused. This is where the idea of redemption through self-worth becomes significant, as it redirects focus away from others and toward personal healing and growth. This process begins with recognizing that self-worth cannot be restored through someone else's validation. Waiting for an apology or a change in behavior places control in the hands of those who caused the hurt, prolonging emotional dependence. Choosing self-worth means reclaiming that control, understanding that one's value is not diminished by how others have treated them. It involves consciously separating identity from past experiences, refusing to let rejection define personal significance. Building self-worth requires intentional effort and self-reflection. It often means challenging deeply ingrained beliefs that were formed through negative experiences, such as feeling unimportant or undeserving. Over time, these beliefs can be replaced with a more balanced and compassionate understanding of oneself. This shift is not immediate, it develops gradually through small but consistent actions, such as setting boundaries, prioritizing personal well-being, and engaging in environments that reinforce a sense of value and respect. Unlike confrontation, which focuses on addressing the past, redemption through self-worth emphasizes creating a stronger present and future. It is less about proving others wrong, and more about proving to oneself that growth is possible, despite what has been experienced. This approach transforms the narrative from one of victimhood to one of empowerment, where the individual becomes an active participant in their own healing, rather than waiting for external resolution. Another important aspect of this concept is the sense of peace it brings. When self-worth is firmly established, the need to revisit past conflicts or seek acknowledgement diminishes. There is a quiet confidence that replaces the urge to explain or justify one's feelings. This does not erase the memory of what happened, but it changes its impact, allowing it to exist without controlling emotions or decisions. Over time, this form of redemption creates a stable internal foundation that is not easily shaken by external behavior. It allows a person to move forward with clarity, focusing on what aligns with their values and well-being, rather than what once caused them pain. The strength gained through this process is deeply personal, rooted in the understanding that true closure does not come from confrontation, but from the ability to rebuild oneself with a renewed sense of worth and purpose. In the end, this story was never truly about an anniversary, an invitation, or even a moment of rejection. It was about awakening. It was about realizing that the place once called home does not always offer the warmth it promises, and that belonging cannot be forced where it is not freely given. The silence, the exclusion, and the harsh words were not the end of the story. They were the turning point. Because sometimes the greatest shift in life happens when you stop asking to be chosen and start choosing yourself. What was once pain became clarity. What once felt like loss became freedom. There was no need for loud confrontation, no need to prove anything to anyone, because the real victory was internal. It was in walking away with dignity intact, in transforming hurt into strength, and in understanding that self-worth is not something others get to decide. The gift that was opened that day carried more than a message. It carried a realization that could no longer be ignored. Not every story ends with reconciliation, and not every wound receives an apology. But some endings are powerful in a different way. They bring closure, growth, and a quiet kind of strength that speaks louder than words ever could. And sometimes the most unforgettable revenge is not what you do to others, but what you become despite them. Thank you for listening, for feeling, and for allowing this story to resonate. May you carry forward the strength to value yourself, the courage to walk away from what diminishes you, and the wisdom to build a life that reflects your true worth. Wishing you all the very best on your journey ahead. May it be filled with self-respect, peace, and the kind of success that no one can take away.